demonstrating curiosity, that is a skill set, that is a trait that will carry you to where you want to go. Ultimately, wherever you want to get to, I can guarantee to you, asking questions and being curious is at the center of it.
Welcome to another episode of the Education Matters podcast. This week, I'm interviewing Vincent Andrisani. Vincent is an associate professor in the teaching stream in the Communication and Media Studies program at Carleton University. He specializes in the area of sound studies, intersecting the fields of soundscape studies, oral history, and popular music studies. Media production is an important dimension of Vincent's research and teaching, and he presently produces and hosts a radio show called The Place of Sound that showcases audio media produced in his classrooms, and that can be found at www.theplaceofsound.ca. So I've known Vincent for well over 30 years at this point, and over the years he's worked really hard to become an excellent teacher. To give you a sense of how excellent, just read his student reviews online. He's also been acknowledged by Carleton University with a Future Learning Innovation Fellowship, as well as the university's prestigious Teaching Excellence Award in the Faculty of Public and Global Affairs. So I asked Vincent onto the show because he's constantly refining his teaching practice, and I wanted him to discuss his unique approach to pedagogy that uses sound and media production to engage students to think critically. One of my goals here is to introduce his approach to a broader audience of K-12 educators who I believe will find his work and reflections on teaching valuable. His work is also informed by a uniquely Canadian approach to pedagogy that has its roots in the work of Marshall McLuhan and was further developed by Marshall student and composer Murray Schafer, as well as his colleagues Hildegard Westerkamp and Barry Truax. So Vince's work and pedagogy is firmly situated in a great line of Canadian scholarship and education. And I hope those of you in the edtech world, and especially those of you involved in designing professional learning for teachers, will find some of the topics he discusses around sound, listening, instruction really useful. In this week's episode, Vincent shares his background in sound studies and how it has influenced his teaching. We discuss 3 assignments Vincent gives to his students that focus on how sound and listening can help students develop critical thinking skills and teach them to engage with the world in a different way. We also discuss the importance of encouraging students to ask questions and to be curious, and how an understanding of the past is crucial to understanding the present. Without further ado, I present you with my conversation with Vincent Andrisani. Well, Vincent, thank you for joining me today. Where does this podcast find you?
Thank you. First, thank you for having me. It's so great to do this again. And I say again because we chat often, and it's always fun. So thanks for inviting me. The podcast is shaping up to be really great, and I'm excited to see how it all turns out. I'm coming to you from Carleton University campus. This is my office.
Fantastic. So obviously we've known each other for the better part of our lives, and at this stage I would have given you a proper introduction, but I really couldn't think of a better person to have as one of my first guests on this podcast because of your experience over the years in higher ed. So maybe can you give the audience a brief overview of your background and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. Yep. So I'm I'm faculty here in the School of Journalism Communication. I teach in the Communication Media Studies program at Carleton University. My background is in sound studies, so I do communication. I got a PhD in communication studies from SFU, Simon Fraser University in British Columbia. Here at Carleton, I'm a teaching professor, so I'm part of the teaching stream. I'm dedicated teaching faculty, and so what that means is I teach a bit of a higher load here, 3 and 3. So that's three courses per semester is what I teach rather than a 2 and 2
Mm.
load. So 2 courses per semester.
Yeah, and this is really one of the reasons that I wanted to interview you. Is you've really spent a lot of time in the classroom, in various structures, from grad courses to intro courses, pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID now. So I certainly want to get your perspective on the classroom environment, the future of education from your perspective. But let's maybe start, because personally I'm fascinated by biography. And let's give the audience a sense of how you got to this place as a professor at Carleton. So maybe let's start with your background. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Toronto, north of Toronto, the GTA. My schooling has been public education all the way through, elementary school, high school. I did university at York University, my undergrad, my master's. Like I said, my PhD I did out in BC. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of my, I mean, a suburban middle class, somewhat aspiring middle class upbringing. I can tell you, I'm the first one in my family to have an advanced degree, a PhD. So I don't have there's no lineage of this. This was a very new thing for me, going through graduate school is it's like really trial by fire. I still feel kind of a little bit conflicted about being in this environment, in light of many things. But I mean, I enjoy it, and I think I've been able to find a way through it. So yeah, that's a little bit about my background, I would say.
Yeah, I think certainly to anyone listening with a graduate degree understands the consternation that you're expressing there as to how difficult it is to not only go through graduate studies, but then to find a position such as the one that you found. So certainly want to come back to experience at Carleton, but tell me a little bit more about what aspects of your education stand out for you as you were growing up.
Yeah, I think that that I was educated in mostly working class setting is what stands out to me. I think there are a lot of people in academia. Academia, I mean, is historically and still is very much a sort of elitist endeavor, right? There's a real social hierarchy in these environments, but bringing that sort of sensibility of being, a second generation immigrant. My parents both came here from Italy. Bringing that sensibility into this environment creates a sort of relatability, especially in light of my student body. At least I'd like to think, especially in light of my student body. Like, I mean, there are students in my classroom from every continent on the planet. And so what is it that become like, how does one relate to, such an audience? And I don't know, like, I'm not in any way arguing that I have it figured out, but I do think that having a background that is not bound directly to this place allows me to think about what this is in a broader context. So in terms of my education, like what is it about my education that sort of stands out is that it's a bit of like, it strikes me as somewhat of an unlikely story, that I've landed here. There are so many points in the way that I could point to as like, oh, could have went left, but it went right, and there's a lot of luck involved in it too, tons. But that I was educated in such environments is it only helped me, I would say. Yeah.
So if you think back on it, when it comes to education, or actually, let me broaden that. When it comes to your learning,
Hmm.
what was your first love? What was the
Wow.
first thing you remember that you just love to learn and love to do over and over?
Yeah, I could tell you it wasn't math. Um, and it still isn't. I don't know. That's a really good question. I think things that allowed me to think freely about what they are,
Mm,
were things that I found like the potential to maybe play with ideas,
mm,
right? The potential to play with ideas was one was and I don't know that I have any examples, to be quite frank,
mm,
but
mm,
the possibility of building something up, of thinking freely, yeah, of there not being a particular rule set in front of you where um I don't know, maybe moments where I didn't feel constrained, because I mean, really, like, this is at the heart of doing the work that I do, right? It's like this is at the heart of being an academic in the humanities and social sciences, is being able to play with ideas, being able to grapple with them from here, and then from
mhm,
here, and then from back here, and then it's like, so there's not really, like, it's just a matter of perspective and being able to jump in and fiddle with it. Um, um, you know, in different moments and at different ways. And I think that was probably something that I was attracted to when I was younger as well.
So then what did you study then that most impacted how you think and your work today? So you express this love of ideas, love of new
Mm,
ideas, of challenging what it sounded to me, at least implicitly what you said, challenging orthodoxy in your own thinking.
yeah.
So what did you study that most impacted not only the way you think but your work?
Yeah. At what point in my life? Any?
You pick.
Whenever?
Yeah, you
I
pick.
pick. Yeah, I think it was music. Yeah, it was
Mm,
music. Yeah, yeah, because music, I think, is really, like, there is there are right and wrong ways of doing things,
mm-hmm.
really. I mean, I guess, but there's also no right or wrong way to do things. It's like, I mean, depends on what school of thought, what school you prescribe to, right? I mean, if you're going to be a classically trained musician, clearly you're going to be taught in such a way, right? But
There are
also,
certain
at the
things you
end,
have to do,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There. I mean, to play in an orchestra, there are
Mm-hmm.
certain things you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
But to make music, like, there are not certain things that you have to do. I mean, you have to make sound. I mean, that's about it, right? Like, to be a musician. And even then, John Cage, didn't do that, right? And he was a musician. So like, go figure. So yeah, I think music is like, it's the metaphor, right? It's the metaphor. It's like the physical. It's like the literal thing. It's the tangible thing that I was attracted to. I played drums for many years, but it's
How did you get
also,
into drums? I don't think all these years I've never asked you. I was around when you got into drums, but I don't know how you got into drums.
well, drums are the coolest instrument. So I mean, why? How not?
Why would
How would you
why
not get
wouldn't
into
you?
drums? Why wouldn't you? I mean, I don't know. There was a big back and forth between my parents when I was younger. My parents wanted to sign me up for piano lessons, and I was always reticent because I said I want to play drums. In hindsight, that was the worst.
Okay,
That was
but
the
just tell
worst
me how.
idea, right?
Why? Well, for a parent, I certainly appreciate how
Touche,
inconvenient the drums are. But
touche.
um, why the drums? Did you see it? Do you have an early recollection of like you saw somebody playing the drums and you're like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen? Or was
No,
it a
no.
relative, a teacher, anything?
I don't think so. I don't think so. A lot of drummers, especially drummers that are in the older generation to myself. A lot of them would say, "Oh, they saw Ringo play drums
Right.
on
Or they
Ed
heard
Sullivan, and
Bono. Yeah.
that was the moment, right?" Or they heard
Right.
John Bonham, and that was the
Yeah.
moment. I don't know that I have a moment. Like, I mean, I don't know. I really like a handful of drummers. I could point to a
Mm,
handful of drummers and I say,
sure.
"Oh, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool," and I want to do that. But there was no, like, light switch. I always had just this attraction to wanting to play drums and music, right? So my
Awesome.
mom played piano, so that was kind of a gateway into
in the
music, but for me,
background.
it was always drums. Yeah.
Okay, so I think this is quite an interesting mix. I mean, I know your work, so saying, the field that impacted your work as a communication scholar the most is music is makes sense to me. But maybe help the audience see how you went from loving music and being a cool drummer and wanting to drum to the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, yeah. So music really was the sort of entry point for me into doing what's referred to as sound studies. Sound studies is a field of study in the humanities and social sciences that kind of brings together questions about sound, listening, sound cultures, technologies, economies around sound, and it's this really sort of emergent sort of field of study that 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 um, that uh, as I say, it kind of allows scholars across a variety of fields to realize, hey, we have this same sort of thematic through line. How can our research benefit from learning what each one of us is doing, no matter whether we're doing it in, for example, anthropology or communication studies or sociology um, or political science or science and technology studies, or you pick the field, whatever the field is in the humanities and social sciences. This umbrella term, sound studies, has kind of emerged. And for me, my sort of entry point into that was music. Um, and I felt really like, I felt really, I was very curious about music, and so I studied it, and I had a couple of small research projects, and still, even recently, as far as recent as 2022, I was writing about music and drums and drumming. But I also felt unsatisfied, let's say, by what
Mhm.
music meant in in the broader world of sound and the broader world of listening, right? So sort of where I came upon this was, I did a lot of work in Cuba and the city of Havana, both musically and non-musically in the world of sound, and I realized that so in the study of Cuban music, um, we could study Cuban music, we could study Cuban history, but I always and also performance of Cuban music as well. I was doing some performance studies while I was there, and what I realized was, um, no matter how intimately I understood Cuban music, as intimate as a performer, there was always something about it that was intangible to me,
Mhm.
that I couldn't grasp. And part of why I couldn't grasp it was because, I didn't really, the history isn't, it's not a hit. Like, I'm a non-native in Cuba. When I visited for long periods of a time, but, my history there is limited. And so what I know, and so here's for example, the for example would be, what does it mean when a Black Cuban performer plays the conga? What is the symbolism? Well, that's an instrument that for many years was outlawed on the island,
Mhm.
right? One couldn't play the conga for a long period of time. Yeah. And so how do I grasp these? What does it mean to grasp these? So what I landed on was, there's this idea that there is such a thing uh, as musical listening, not just music making. There's a thing as
Mhm.
musical listening as well,
Mhm.
isn't there? Where the meaning of music is generated not by the
Mhm.
performer, not in the performance, but in the reception of that performance, right? And
Mhm.
so and so and so to truly understand what Cuban music is, or any music, one must look into what is musical listening. How does one do musical listening, right? How do communities do musical listening? Where does the listening take place? And so this was a conclusion of my an exciting idea, but a conclusion of my
Mhm.
MA work. And then that question, I kind of pushed it a little further, and I asked, um, can we say the same thing about non-musical listening? Can we say the same thing about extra musical listening? Can we say the same thing about everyday listening, right? Is that too an entry point into learning more about people and places and histories and economies and you pick and the politics of a given
Mm.
region or urban setting or whatever? The short answer is yes, and that was the basis for my PhD research in the same place.
Well, I mean, there's so much to unpack there.
Mm,
Not the least of which, but maybe a discussion for you and I another time is why
mm.
the conga was outlawed.
Oh well, I mean, slavery, like anti-rebellion. It was a dangerous instrument. There are myriad reasons, and these
Yeah,
are well documented in part of Cuban
yeah.
history, right?
Fascinating to me, though. Fascinating in the sense that um, they intuitively knew the power of the drum, right? Like that's so much so that it needs to be outlawed. But certainly a conversation I want to dive deeper in. But I do want to keep connecting this to your work and your education. Like what I find fascinating and really what is behind this interview series is trying to show how people with an interest develop some really deep thinking or deep practice. And I love that you started with a passion for music and just kept questioning what was behind it, and did a really remarkable study on Cuban music. So maybe it'd be worthwhile, and I don't want to pressure you to summarize an entire thesis into a few minutes, but I think it'd be worthwhile for the audience to now describe the work you did when you and the research you did when you lived in Cuba.
Yeah. So I'll do that. I'll do that in the version of it that you can inscribe on a grain of rice, because my research informs my teaching. Right. So I think this will be productive as we move forward.
So if
The research,
bear with us, you'll learn something about Cuba, but you'll see the connection to the teaching in just a minute.
well, I mean, hopefully, like the thing, what I did in Cuba was I worked with a local research institution. I built an archive of sound. I listened. I spoke with people about sound. I documented sound. I asked as many questions about sound and listening as I possibly could. And here we're talking about the everyday sounds of the city. And what I found, in the short version of it, was that the politics of the city, both past and present, are audible in the city as it's lived today. And in those politics, what we hear is a struggle over the right to the city between people and Cuban history, let's say. And we also hear inventive and innovative ways that Cubans themselves, that people who live in Havana, that Habaneros, residents of Havana, navigate and negotiate the complexity of their realities. So the short version of it is we hear the politics of the city in sound. Now, my method is in fact what informs my teaching. How I did what I did are precisely the things that I carry over into the classroom, right? Listening is not something that just, we turn on and we turn off. It's a skill set that I think has to be cultivated, and we have to learn how to do. We have to learn how to be curious through our ears. This is part of my mandate as a teacher, right? My aim, especially in the production-based courses that I teach, are to help students ask better questions with and through their ears. And so that was my method. That was how I did what I did. And it's my method that I pick up and I transplant large parts of it, as for better or for worse, or as much as I can, into the classroom, asking students to do something similar. So really, and my work, my research serves as examples for students in terms of it's their how-to guide, right? How to do this type of work, how to do this type of listening, how to think outward through your ears, socially, economically, politically, technologically, like to ask bigger questions about the world around us, using our ears, using our bodies, right?
Can you give some examples for the audience of how sound studies is influencing your pedagogy? Maybe some examples would help crystallize this. Because then I also want to ask you the question connected to that is, what would you recommend high school and elementary school teachers do in this area when it comes to sound and pedagogy?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I have a feeling, I don't know much about K to 12 education, but I have a feeling that that elementary school teachers and maybe high school teachers are kind of like they're kind of pushing towards this. I have a feeling that there is a school of thought. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know, but I have a feeling there's a school of thought in elementary K to 12 education that understands our bodies as ways of knowing, right? And ways of learning, ways of experiencing the world. That sensory experience is part and parcel of our otherwise, we'd like to think of this separation between mind and body, but in fact that's not the case, right? We learn through our bodies, we learn with our bodies, right? And so my suspicion is, there are people who are already asking these questions. There are instructors who are already working through these types of methods.
I think just for the record, I think you're spot on. And across Canada, K-12 educators and those that create the curricula are pretty smart folks, and so certainly incorporate this, but maybe not to the degree that we'd like, right? Maybe it's not happening widely enough. And I think hearing from people like you with this experience and expertise can help, keep nudging and giving ideas as to how to incorporate what we think would be very different kind of ideas into the classroom. But I think, as you're suggesting, it's pretty natural to how human beings learn.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. I mean, thinking, yeah, thinking orally, thinking with and through our ears is something that, as I say, maybe it's my music background, maybe it's
That's the way you're wired. But let's give some examples. I've heard some of these before in the class, but some maybe assignments, examples you use in the classroom, I think would be really useful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So, one of the classes that I teach is a fourth year undergraduate course. It's a digital production workshop. So it's a hands-on sort of thing. And I have students produce 3 assignments over the course of the semester. The course is bound by this theme of place, the theme of place, the theme of the idea is that spaces are not empty, abstract, alien geographies, but instead that they're created by people. They're created by people over the course of time, the sort of sociality of space, let's say. And so that's the theme that binds the course. And so across each of the 3 assignments, we see students exploring that theme, space, in sound, in different ways, different permutations of exploring those ideas. So, for example, the first assignment I have students do is what's called an audio portrait. So it's an oral history project where I get students to interview a subject, whomever they choose, on the topic of home. And their idea is to get this person to tell a story, short vignette, about home, what they think the idea of home is. Students edit this down into a 2 to 3 minute piece. It's short, they're quick, they're succinct, and some of them are incredibly moving. The second assignment I get students to do is a soundscape composition. Here I'm pulling from soundscape studies, the history of production that Murray Schafer and Barry Truax and Hildegard Westerkamp worked through with a genre that they were integral. These are folks who I studied with. This is a genre of sound composition that is integral to the work that they did. And its very premise is about exploring space in sound.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea is to get students to go out and do some field recordings and to come up with a 3 to 5 minute composition about the world around them, saying something about a given place. What does it mean? What does it mean to whom and why? So that's the second assignment that students will do in that class. And then the third and final assignment, I've kind of been toying with different ideas over different semesters. Next semester in the fall, I'm going to get students to do a 6 to 7 minute documentary on a place or a monument here in Ottawa, the history of it. I'm going to get them to dig it up. I'm going to get them to talk to somebody about it. And it doesn't have to be a historian, doesn't have to be a public official. It could be a resident of a neighborhood. It could be somebody who's lived beside or in this thing for even the last month and have something to say about it, right? So, and they're gonna put together a documentary style piece on some particular locale here in Ottawa, field recordings, audio interviews, that sort of thing. So this gets students, the hope is this gets students to think about the world around them with and through their ears, prioritizing their ears, because inevitably when they finish a piece, their reflections on it, and this is not a bad thing in any way, but their reflections on each subsequent piece as they put it together are, oh man, I should have done this, or oh man, I could have done that, or oh, I should have been quiet here, and instead I was like, I was talking through the interviewee's thinking, and of course it lends itself to them sounding like they're interrupting, right? And so they realize with hindsight, maybe the could-haves, should-haves, and would-haves, which are all completely fine and acceptable and desirable, right? Because it shows a sense of engagement. But all of this is to say they're learning to think with their ears first, right? rather than think with their writing or whatever. Think in different ways, maybe more traditional ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much to pull at that any K-12 educator would love and see how, dare I say, easily you can incorporate this kind of learning into a classroom at any age. Do they have a writing component as well as part of?
Yes, and not really. Not really. What they have.
Cool. And this is like, just let me point out for that. This is you said a 4th year class.
It's a 4th year undergrad class.
What I love is you're just showing that the thinking, the researching, the writing can happen in very different ways than we're maybe accustomed to, especially at university, in the higher years of university.
But this is the thing, though, right? This is the thing, and is that it is at its core the simplest thing, right? That we do it, that we do this in university almost feels like counterintuitive. Yeah. Right. It's like really, it's like listening. That's it. Like that's the heart of it, right? Like that's the heart of it.
That's where it starts. But you get into good thinking. There's so many skills that they, especially for younger generations, that studies are showing that they're shyer, that they are much more hesitant to go out and ask people that they don't know questions and things like that. So there's like a lot of these soft skills that you need for everyday life, on top of the listening skills that you're obviously pointing out, the critical thinking skills, because they got to put it together. They got to think about the research they're doing, right? And I just love for a generation that has grown up with more tech, you're kind of allowing them to use it in a way that's getting to the core of what you want out of it pedagogically, if I can put it that way.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. I would say all of those things. All of those things are true. I think the and yes, that that this approach does lend itself to, you pick the avenue of thinking that you'd like to pursue, right? I've had students question, think about, gentrification and do projects on the topic of gentrification. I've had students do projects on the topic of forced migration, right? I've had students do projects on homelessness. I've had students do projects on the topic of climate change, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are more pressing issues? Think of more pressing issues for our time than some of the ones that I've just listed. I've had
Mm-hmm.
students do projects on racism and xenophobia, like
And you're
like
open as to the content. You just kind of structure the method for them, and they can pick these areas. Like they have a pretty broad availability to them.
you'd what's like interview somebody on the topic of home. What does home mean? Like home
It's
for many people, home for
different.
many people is displacement. Home for
Mm,
many people is
mm,
nostalgia, a longing
mhm.
to a place that I
Sure.
can't return to,
Interesting.
right? Like think about the politics of home, think about the politics of place, right? These are really charged ideas, but so important, right?
Is
And
there?
so I think it's incumbent upon educators to set up strong parameters in which students can explore
Mm,
an idea, but only that, right?
mm,
Say, this is what this project's going to look like. It's going to be between these two goalposts,
mm.
right? But how that comes to be between these two goalposts, you know, you have some you have flexibility, right?
That's excellent, and I think that's. I mean, in the end, especially with the new curricula out of Alberta and BC, that is really the intention. They want teachers to guide students, to provide them with a framework of,
Mm.
kind of what the scope of the project or the thinking looks like, but then they can
Mhm.
go in multiple directions. So, um, I certainly, and I think a lot of the audience here would appreciate that. Um, I think this might be a good time to ask you, what, in your eyes, then, do the best classrooms look like, sound like, feel like?
Hmm. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the best ones would
Your
look and
ideal.
sound like.
I
Yeah,
know
I
you're the
mean,
mixologist, the best.
I think they should all. I think every classroom should uh, look and feel and sound different. First of all, like I mean, just like every community of people should look and feel and sound a little different. I think good classrooms, which are, by the way, are communities, um, should look and feel and sound a little different. I think for my classrooms, the ones that I've had most success with in the past are ones that are um, that are ones in which students are attentive, not just to me. I mean, every instructor's
Mhm.
dream is to walk in and have 30 or 20 or 400 attentive and curious, bright-eyed students, but that's not the reality of it. And that's fine. Is that there's a sort of attentiveness to one another,
Mhm.
uh, a sort of that's driven by a mutual respect of and for one another, which is also driven by a genuine curiosity for the thing we're trying to do when we get here, right? There has to be a sort of dedication to the cause. Uh, and when you're there, and I'm not saying that these students are going to go out into the world, a dedication in the sense that these students are going to go out
Yeah.
into the world and become,
Yeah.
sound studies professors. No, it's
Mm.
a dedication to the next 3 hours that we're going to be together 12 times a semester, 12 times over the next 12 weeks. You dedicate yourself to this thing that we're
Mm.
trying to do in this room over the course of the next 12 weeks. And when that happens, when there's a good buy-in, not to me, but to the project. It's not
Mm.
about me. The project, the classroom is not about me. It shouldn't be about the instructor because I'm one person of 20 in this classroom. I'm one person of 280 in another classroom, or I'd be one person of 6 in a grad classroom, right? But it's a dedication to this thing that we're trying to do, which is reflected on a syllabus at the outset of the semester. This is the project. This is the task at hand. When students care about that task at hand, the rest follows.
I think that's beautifully said. Beautifully said. So can you describe then, maybe with that in mind, the most inspiring or beautiful things you've seen as an educator?
Yeah, the most inspiring things are students who engage with a course for reasons that go far beyond the things that they're going to produce for it. When students engage with a course for reasons that are not about their own output and the assignments, when students have sort of moments in the context of a semester where their thinking has been challenged and they open up to new possibilities. These are inspiring things. They're inspiring moments. And I love it when that happens. And in fact, I sometimes don't even have to have a one-on-one. I don't even have to hear it from students when they happen. We can see it in their face, right? We can see it when a new idea is impressed upon them and their eyes are wide and they're kind of smirking like, holy cow, either holy cow, I've never thought of that before, or oh my goodness, I haven't had the words to, like, I've always knew that was a thing, but I haven't had the words to express it. And now with this concept, I have the words to say it. For example, I am like, by the way, I imagine these things to be happening in students' minds, right? Just based on, but I think they're happening. I think because I mean, students will tell me from time to time.
I've read some of your reviews. They're happening. They're happening.
Oh, good.
And then, well, I also think you as a fellow lover of ideas, I think you also just described the greatest drug in human existence, and that's the breaking down of one idea and the birth of another. And it's scary for a lot of folks. But I think the kind of work that you do and the great professors and teachers I've had, the work that they do is, opening these windows into these new ideas. So I also think that's a great answer to that question as well.
Excellent. That's a nice way to put it. Thanks.
Well, you put it. I just gave my thoughts there. But so let's focus on the student for one question here. If a student or listening to this, or came to you and asked, what's the most important thing for me to know and understand on my education journey? Say you're talking to a 16-year-old, 17-year-old in high school, and they got, whether it be a trade school or, university or what have you. What would you say to that person is the most important thing that they should know as they endeavor on more learning?
That's a good question. Ask questions. Ask questions. Be curious. Even if a topic isn't something that a topic or a theme, you're covering something in a class or a week in a class, or you're doing a unit or a module that doesn't have your complete attention. Ask questions about it. Be curious about it, because you'll never know how the things that you're learning in this setting, which may or may not appeal to you quite so much, are directly applicable to the thing that does. Or the thing that will, right? So it's difficult to say, what I won't say is, do your best. It's good for you. You should do this. No, I don't know if, we don't know if you should or shouldn't do this. That's kind of besides the point. But I think engaging with it, even on a minimal level, demonstrating curiosity, that is a skill set, that is a trait that will carry you to where you want to go ultimately. Wherever you want to get to, I can guarantee to you, asking questions and being curious is at the center of it.
And it's at the center of our being.
I mean, some people are more that case, that are more curious and inquisitive than others, right? I'd
So
like to
keep
think it is. You're right.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And your encouragement there is to keep pushing it, even for those that are naturally curious, to keep staying engaged, to keep asking questions throughout. And I think a corollary to that is that the professor, despite what we think going into university, isn't the center for all the answers, right? But they're a great person to ask questions to learn from, to get pointed in the right direction, or learn something different.
Absolutely. I have no answers. Really. I have no answers. Like for students, I don't have any answer. My aim is not to tell students how to think, right? Like that's not my job. I don't care like what they think. I may go as so far as and to be somewhat provocative and to say, doesn't matter what you think. But if you don't have the ability to ask questions, then you have nothing. And my hope is that the work that I do will help students ask better questions, right? Because that's all we do, right? Is like I present, for my intro class, I present communication studies. I don't say, hey, here's communication studies, here are the things that we know because we have communication studies. Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, hey, here's communication studies, here are the questions that communication studies asks. And because it asks these type of questions, that's what makes it communication studies and not anthropology, right? That's what makes it communication studies and not economics, right? It's because of these types of questions. So the hope is to show students, in fact, education is very much the pursuit of better questions, right? If you want to think about it on those terms.
And I love that because that's firmly rooted in the Socratic traditions, which are the ways to deeper and better thinking, which I love. Okay, so if now I ask you from your perspective, and it's completely fine, it's your own perspective. What does education look like to you in the future? Let's randomly say 50 years down the road.
Yeah. Man,
the good, the bad, the ugly, wherever you want to go with this.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question. To be honest with you, I have no idea.
No. I think predictions are tough, but I just want to I want to spitball with you. What does it look like?
So here's the thing is that academics, the pursuit of academics and scholarly thinking is never really one that points to the future. Like its aim is not to predict something in one way, shape, or form or another, right? Instead, academics are far more interested in the past than they are in the future, because we understand that the past weighs really heavy, and the ways, like the things that we have in front of us, the barriers that are presented to us, are consequences of the decisions that we've made previously. And so if we better understand the past, I think then we're going to have a lot more to work with when we think about what the future is and what it can be, right? So actually, I think the pursuit is not what is the future. It's what were the decisions that we've made in the past that have shaped our present, and how can we better and maybe reconfigure some of our missteps so that our future is more well informed, and so that we don't make the same mistakes that we've made previously, right?
So what would be some of the things that you would point to? Like, I think that's a very interesting perspective, one that I haven't thought about, but now that you say it, some things that come to mind that they do more in the U.S. than Canada. But for example, like the onerous amount of testing they do in the US, right? Like essentially they have perfected the student test taker, you know, like they're great at taking
Yeah.
tests. They're not, that we know is not great for critical thinking, for,
Mm.
collaboration, all these other things that we know we need to have a productive society. So that's just one
Yeah.
example that came to mind that looking
Yeah.
back, we would want to correct. I mean, it's still happening today. We have,
Yeah.
by the way, in Canada corrected that. We don't do anywhere near that standardized testing. But anything, either in your practice or even in your own education, that looking
Yeah.
back, you would say, these are the couple things that if we change would have much better outcomes down the road.
Yeah. A really good way of phrasing it, or sort of reframing it. So the thing is, there's a couple things. One is the idea of testing
Mhm.
is now an interesting one, because I feel like over the last like 15, 20, 25 years, and I could say this only anecdotally through experience,
Mhm.
of my experience at the university, is that there's been a strong shift away from testing, from like exam writing for in the context of courses, especially in our discipline. I mean, sciences have always been quite different, right? Testing
Mhm.
is the name of the game there. But like, my suspicion is in the broader humanities and social sciences that we've moved away from exam writing in general. But now, because of generative AI, that what's old is new again, right? We've moved back to putting students in a box, and there's a sort of freshness to the approach,
Mhm.
to be quite frank, after
Mhm.
many years of thinking on these terms, which is, getting students to work in groups and doing collaboration and doing maybe more experiential learning and
Mhm.
all of these other things, right? So that's one thing about that. The other thing is, okay, so where would I place my cards if I were to say what were some of the wrongs of the past? I don't even know if it's wrongs. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't know
just
that
some
there
of
are
the things that
wrongs
you'd
really,
want to
but
change.
so in I could speak to communication studies, right?
Mhm.
So that, like, this is the field that I work in. This is what I am somewhat of experienced in. I don't, and I have maybe some things to say about. And one of the things I would say is that in communication studies, there has been, especially in Canadian communication studies, Canadian communication tradition, but I mean, presumably also in the States, is that there's this real sort of stark divide between teaching communication studies as a theoretical endeavor and teaching communication studies as this hands-on, praxis-based thing where students go out and make stuff in the
Mhm.
world, right? Produce
Mhm.
things, as we talked about earlier. And my approach to communication studies has never favored one over the other. The work that I've done has been theoretically informed, but also there is this very strong practice-based component to it, right? I talked about the work that I did in Cuba, and it's like I made an archive of audio media recordings, and I work with those audio media recordings. So some of my work is my research is expressed, of course, in a more traditional format: journal articles, peer-reviewed
Mhm.
journal articles, book chapters, and the like. But it also takes different shapes, right?
Mhm.
Shapes that circulate neatly in our contemporary media environment: audio, oral history projects, right? Soundscape compositions, audio documentaries. These are things that I
Mhm.
do that are very much legitimate expressions of communication studies and scholarly thinking. And so in my revisionist history of where maybe we could have done something more is is understanding that communication studies, and by the way, I say communication studies, but I'll bet there's folks over in anthropology who would argue the same. I'll
Mhm.
bet there's folks over in sociology who would argue the same, because what I'm interested in doing now in my current research project is pulling through some threads of communication studies history that have been glossed over in favor of this more traditional theoretical
Mhm.
tradition, which
Mhm.
is absolutely important and absolutely forms the theoretical basis of our field. But also,
Mhm.
there's this other thing, right? There's this entirely other thing. And what ends up happening in programs over, and this is the sort of pivot of the critique, is that programs who are teaching communication studies across Canada have set up dedicated courses and streams that teach production. Why? Because students want to leave university with hands-on skills. They come to university and they say, I got to be job ready. It's like, yeah, okay, so now we're going to deliver to students these new streams of an undergrad program and these new suites of courses that do this thing. But my argument is, well, that thing that we're now delivering, we're giving to students, we're in fact selling to students as a thing that we do, that's actually also, that's always been a part of this field of study. And it's only now that we're pulling from it because it's helping put butts in seats. It's helping sell the thing. It's helping sweeten the pot, saying, oh, you're going to learn these hands-on things. But actually, it's not something we should sell. This is actually something that we've always done. We've just not thought of it in this more comprehensive way, right? And so it is quite conceivable, which is the project that I'm working on, is going back into communications history and saying, here's a thread. Here are some people who did this work. Here are some people who did this work. Why haven't we thought of this as central to the field? My suspicion is one could do something similar in sociology. One could do something similar in anthropology and say, actually, practice has always been part of this tradition. Why are we now thinking about it on these separate terms, right? So that would be one way that I would kind of go back and say, maybe we could rejig this just a little bit. And it's interesting to critique the way that the disciplinary formation is institutionalized. This is the critique, right? Is its institutionalization. Now we're selling this thing because it benefits us, but actually that thing that we're selling has always been part of what our broader project is in communication studies.
Excellent. So
does that make sense?
Yeah, it certainly does. Yeah. So we look back there and now if I could ask you, as we kind of get to the end here, what are you hopeful for? There's a lot of political angst in the world. There's a lot of climate angst, and there's a lot going on. But I want to make a good part of this is to tap some of the minds that I'm talking to and look forward and look at the things that we're hopeful for. Because I think if we don't have a vision of that, they won't happen.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of students who I encounter every semester who have a real genuine interest in the work that we set out to do. They're there and they're ready to learn, not because of me, maybe even in spite of me. They're there to learn. And this is what I'm hopeful for, is that these students are really interested in making the most of their time here. They're acquiring hopefully all of the skills and the resources that we're able to deliver. I mean, this is our MO. I mean, the calling card of the university is that we teach students how to think. We're not good at anything beyond that. That's about the only thing we can do, really, is to teach students how to think. And they're there and they're ready to do that thing. And so that gives me hope. It gives me hope. And this isn't to single out a sort of subset of students, because I also know that in my class, in my first year class especially, there's a good bunch of them who are not ready to do that thing. They're there. They're not exactly sure why they're there. And they don't have a genuine interest in the work that we set out to do. That too, I think, is fine. I think that's fine. I think that in a university classroom, my aim is not to teach necessarily, there are learning outcomes to be sure, but my aim is not to teach students to say, by the end of the semester, you will be able to do X, Y, and Z. I don't know. You might not. You might be able to get through the course and still maybe not be able to do all those things that we set out to do. But I'm also a believer in, sometimes a student doesn't really realize what they've learned until many months or many years later in a class, right? Maybe they'll come back, 2 years from the time that they were in my class, and I won't remember them. And they'll say, "Hey, do you remember you talked about this thing in this class? I didn't really understand what it meant, but I've been thinking about that." It's like, I have no idea what you're talking about now, but it shows that student learning isn't done at the end of the semester. And I think about myself as an undergrad, and I didn't do particularly well in first year. It took me a while to come around and figure out how this thing works, and the value of the thing that was being offered to me. It took me a while. It wasn't until third or fourth year that I started realizing, oh yes, I get this now. And I needed the sort of quasi fails or the tough going in the first year or two in order to get there. So that's fine too. I mean, I think all of the above is fine, and all of which is hopeful. It's a source of inspiration.
So as somebody who sees the young adults of tomorrow essentially every day, you don't have a pessimistic view of the type of quality of their character. If anything, the opposite. You're inspired by the minds that are coming through. Did I summarize that accurately?
Yeah. I would say so. I would say so. Yes. Every semester there are students that surprise me, and I'm surprised in new ways by different sets of students. I mean, these students, they know way more than I did at their age. Like in their first year, second year, fourth year of undergrad, they're light years beyond where I feel like I may have been at that time, right? In terms of their access to the world, in terms of the things that they know or don't know. I think on the whole, I'm hopeful, because why be any other way?
Fantastic. So to wrap up, for the students, or maybe even more in particular, aspiring teachers, is there a book, a podcast, a band, an album that you would recommend?
Yeah. Podcast. So I can only say what I've been listening to and what I've been working on recently, and what I've been thinking about recently. I don't know that I have one must read that I'll point people to, but podcast. The podcast I've been listening to is Phantom Power, which is a podcast about sound and sound studies. It's comprised of really, really interesting interviews. It's produced by Mac Haygood, who I think is at the University of Florida or Miami. He's a sound studies scholar, and every month he puts out a new one. It's now come to an end very recently, and there's always someone new and someone doing excellent work in the field of sound studies. And book that I'm reading presently is a book called The Power of Podcasting. It's by Siobhan McHugh is the author. She's a scholar from Australia, I believe, and the book is published through a university publisher, Columbia University Press, but really it reads like a how to do podcasting, podcasting 101, let's say. These are the things that make podcasts interesting. Here's how podcasts are produced. Here are some themes that you hear in some of the more successful podcasts. And so it's an awesome read. So I would recommend that.
Given this endeavor, I should absolutely get that one. Vincent, thank you for your time today. This was great.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Until next time.